My name is Elaine Rowe. I'm 67 years old. The morning began like any other soft Charleston light slipping through the kitchen blinds. The smell of toast. The faint creak of the old ceiling fan. I was pouring coffee when Lila said it. Her voice calm, precise, as if reading from a to-do list. Mom, I think it's time you moved out. I need more space for myself. The words hung there, thin and sharp, cutting through the hum of the refrigerator. She didn't look up from her phone. Her hair was pinned neatly for work. Her blazer draped over the chair I'd bought her after college. She spoke like she was discussing square footage. Not my life. I stared at the sugar bowl, one hand still around the coffee pot. Moved out, I repeated quietly, testing how those words sounded in my kitchen. The one her father built with his own hands. The one where she learned to hold a spoon. It's not personal. She went on quickly. I just need my own area. A studio. Maybe somewhere I can think. Her voice softened at the end. The way people do when they believe they've said something reasonable. I nodded once, mostly to steady myself. Of course, I said, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. Outside. The morning heat was already thick. I focused on the small things, the scrape of her chair on the tile, the faint citrus scent of her perfume, the sound of her keys hitting the counter as she gathered her things for work. When the front door closed, the house exhaled. I sat back down at the table, staring at the empty cup she'd left behind. Pale lipstick on the rim. That's when it hit me, not anger, not even sadness, but something colder. The realization that she'd been planning this. The way her files had taken over the living room, the weekend boxes labeled office supplies, the subtle clearing of space that I'd mistaken for organization. The ceiling fan ticked softly, and for the first time in years, the house sounded too large for just me. I rose, walked through the hallway, and paused where the pencil marks still lined the doorframe, each one with a date. Lila's name in my handwriting. Her last mark stopped at age 14. I traced it with my thumb, the dust clinging to my skin, and for a long time I just stood there, listening to a silence that no longer felt like home. That night, I opened the hall closet and reached for the old folder marked "Mortgage Paid in Full." The next morning, I sat on the edge of my bed, sunlight crawling across the carpet like a slow reminder that the world kept moving, whether I wanted it to or not. The folder I'd pulled from the closet lay beside me, a worn manila one labeled in my handwriting, Home Ledger. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were receipts layered like thin memories, mortgage payments, utility bills, bank statements with corners softened by time. Tucked between them were check stubs and notes written in my late husband's careful pen. Near the back, I found the ones with only my name. There was the $2,800 check I wrote for Lila's first car when hers broke down on the interstate. A few pages later, another for the credit card balance she couldn't cover after the divorce. I'd told her not to worry, that things would settle soon. Then came the down payment for this very house, the one she called our place. Even though she never signed the deed, I traced the faded ink with one finger. So many years of saying yes before anyone had to ask, of being the quiet safety net stretched thin beneath everyone else's leap. A gust of warm air drifted through the open window, carrying the faint scent of magnolia. It reminded me of the spring mornings when Lila was small, when she'd crawl into my bed just to watch the light change on the ceiling. I'd thought that kind of closeness lasted forever. I closed the folder carefully and set it on the nightstand. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel tired, not angry, either just clear, as if I'd finally found the bottom line of a life that had been paid for in quiet installments. That afternoon, I walked through the house the way people visit old friends, slowly, listening for what still spoke. The floorboards answered first, groaning softly under my feet, a language I'd learned over decades, Every sound was familiar, even comforting. The kitchen still smelled faintly of lemon oil and varnish, a scent that never quite left after the last project my husband finished before he passed. The tiles were uneven in one corner. We'd laid them ourselves one summer when the money was tight. He'd laughed when I insisted on keeping the crooked one by the stove, saying it gave the room character. I'd agreed, mostly because his laugh filled the space better than any perfect floor could. I brushed my hand along the windowsill, feeling the faint ridge of his initials carved beneath the paint. No one else knew they were there. He'd done it one night after too many beers, grinning as he pressed the pocket knife into the wood. "If the house ever forgets us," he said, "it'll have our names to remember." The sunlight shifted across the walls, catching the framed photos that lined the hallway: birthdays, graduations, faces from other seasons. In one, Lila sat on his shoulders, her hands tangled in his hair, the two of them laughing at something outside the frame. I traced the glass lightly, careful not to leave a smudge. In the study, I opened the old oak drawer where we'd kept our most important papers. Inside was the original deed, folded neatly inside a yellowed envelope. My name was printed beside his, the mortgage stamp long marked "paid in full." For a long moment, I just stood there, the weight of it steady in my hands. Then I pressed my thumb over the embossed seal, feeling the raised edges like proof of something solid, something earned. The air in the room was still, warm, waiting. "They forgot who built this," I whispered, setting the deed down on the desk, but the house didn't. The next few days brought a new rhythm to the house. Lila's, not mine. She began leaving small hints around, as if the idea might sting less if it arrived dressed in good manners. Pamphlets appeared on the kitchen counter, glossy covers showing smiling retirees playing bridge under pastel umbrellas. Independent living communities. They read in cheerful fonts. "Just information," she said one morning, her tone light, almost casual. "Some of these places have art studios and walking trails. You'd love them, Mom." I smiled faintly, pretending to read one. "Looks nice," I said, but her eyes weren't on the page, they were on the hallway beyond me, where my things still lived. The next evening, she mentioned fresh starts, how a change of scenery could be healthy. She didn't mean to sound impatient, but she did. The words came clipped, like she'd practiced them in front of a mirror. I listened, stirring my tea, feeling the quiet build around us. She believed she was being kind, that her tone softened the message. She paid no rent, signed no lease. She'd simply stayed and then stayed longer. But beneath her careful phrasing, I heard the truth: I was in the way. 2 mornings later, Sam Wallace came by to fix the dripping faucet. He's been my neighbor since before Lila was born, a patient man with the hands of someone who's repaired more than plumbing. As he worked, he glanced at the stack of pamphlets by the sink. "She's planning for you." "Huh?" he said softly, without looking up. I didn't answer. He tightened the last screw, tested the handle, and straightened. "They don't build walls this strong anymore," he muttered. "Don't let anyone tear yours down." After he left, I stood in the doorway, watching the light shift across the kitchen tiles. The faucet no longer dripped, but the silence felt heavier. That night, I sat at my desk with a notebook and drew 2 columns. Across the top, I wrote, "Keep, change, reclaim," under keep. I listed my husband's tools, the rocking chair, the photo in the hallway, under change. I wrote 1-word locks. I closed the notebook and placed it neatly beside the lamp. For the first time in weeks, I felt a kind of balance return, not loud or defiant, just steady, like the first quiet line of a plan beginning to take shape. By the end of the week, I'd decided to stop waiting for someone to hand me permission. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with the phone, a yellow pad, and the quiet confidence that comes when anger cools into purpose. The first call was to a contractor I'd found years ago on a neighborhood bulletin board. Minor updates, I told him, keeping my tone light. Bathroom tiles, a few doors, maybe some wiring checked. He didn't need to know it was more than that. We scheduled the work for afternoons when Lila would still be at the office. The men arrived in dusty trucks, polite and efficient, their boots leaving temporary prints on the porch I once scrubbed every spring. They tore out the old tile in the bathroom, first replaced it with textured stone, less slippery, more solid. Then came the painters, their rollers whispering across the walls, erasing the fading beige. Lila always said she'd modernize one day. I supervised everything quietly, offering coffee, checking receipts, making sure no one touched the carved initials under the windowsill. When deliveries arrived, I stored the boxes in the attic, paint cans, fixtures, brass handles all labeled, all accounted for. Each improvement felt like a quiet act of defiance dressed as maintenance. I wasn't reclaiming the house in grand gestures. I was securing it piece by piece. One afternoon, as the electrician adjusted the new wiring, he asked, "You planning to sell soon?" "Something like that," I said. That night, after the last truck pulled away and the air smelled faintly of fresh paint, I sat at my desk and opened my diary. The ink bled slightly on the page as I wrote, "I'm not fighting her. I'm fortifying myself." Outside, the porch light flickered, catching the soft gleam of the new door hinges. The house seemed to exhale stronger now. Steadier. Every nail, every brushstroke was a quiet promise to myself. If they expected me to leave, they'd be the ones standing outside next time. Lila left early Friday morning, suitcase in hand, announcing she'd be gone for the weekend. Wellness retreat. She called it 3 days of yoga, meditation, and resetting intentions. I wished her a safe trip and watched from the window as her car disappeared down the street. The moment the sound of her engine faded, I dialed the first number. By 8, the house was alive. The low hum of drills and the rhythmic thud of hammers echoed through the walls like a heartbeat, rediscovering its rhythm. The painters moved with quiet precision, their ladders scraping gently against the hallways that had once echoed with my daughter's footsteps. The smell of fresh paint filled the air, soft ivory, warm and clean, replacing the dull gray she'd insisted on. In the living room, sunlight bounced off the new hardwood floors, smooth and honey-colored. I ran my palm along the surface, remembering how my husband used to sand each board by hand, patient as the tide. The workers replaced hinges, sealed cracks, and polished the banister until it gleamed. By noon, the house looked new, but not strange. It looked mine again. Upstairs, I stood at the doorway of the master bedroom, the one Lila had recently declared she'd convert into her studio. The walls now glowed with pale blue, the same shade I'd chosen years ago when we first moved in. I'd had them restore the old crown molding, the one her father carved from salvaged wood. The afternoon light poured through the window, catching the edges of the bed frame, the air carrying the faint scent of varnish and lavender. For the first time in months, the room felt peaceful. When the last of the crew packed up and left, silence settled over the house, not empty, but satisfied. I took out the small brass lock I'd bought from the hardware store 2 weeks earlier. My hands trembled slightly as I fitted it into place, tightening the screws one by one. Then, with a deep breath, I slid the new key into the lock and turned it. The sound was sharp, final, and perfect. I texted Lila locks changed for safety. "Your room is untouched. Call me to arrange a time if you need to pick anything up." I left the message unread and put the phone face down. I stood on the porch as the dusk light softened around me, the new keys warm in my hand. "Now it fits again," I whispered. And for the first time in years, I meant it. By Sunday evening, the house had fallen into a peaceful rhythm again. The paint was dry. The air still held the faint tang of varnish, and the light through the new curtains had that soft, forgiving glow of late summer. I was rinsing a brush in the sink when I heard the sound. Lila's car pulling into the driveway, the tires crunching over the gravel she'd once begged me to replace with concrete. A car door slammed. Then another. The quiet broke. A moment later, the doorknob rattled, followed by the sharp scrape of metal against metal. Once, twice, then a pause. I could almost hear the confusion behind it. Another try. Still nothing. "Mom." Her voice carried through the door, tinged with impatience. "Something's wrong with the lock." I wiped my hands on a rag, the paint still fresh under my nails, and walked to the door. When I opened it, she stood there, suitcase in one hand, phone in the other. Her brow creased. "What did you do?" she demanded, holding up her useless key like evidence. "I renovated," I said quietly, "and changed the locks. It's safer that way." Her eyes widened, then narrowed. Safer from who I met her stare, steady and calm. From confusion. She laughed short, incredulous. "You changed the locks on me, Mom. That's insane. You can't just—" "I can," I said gently. And I did. Her jaw tightened. "You're overreacting. This is about those pamphlets, isn't it? I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to help." "I know," I said, and I listened. "You wanted your own space. Now," I nodded toward the doorway. "So do I." For a long moment, neither of us moved. The air between us felt thick, full of things unsaid, years of small kindnesses mistaken for obligation, silences mistaken for agreement. Finally, Leela exhaled, shaking her head. "I don't even know what to say." "Then don't," I murmured. She stared at me a moment longer, then turned, dragging her suitcase toward the car. I watched from the doorway, not angry, not proud, just steady. When her tail lights disappeared around the corner, I closed the door. Not quickly, not with satisfaction, just gently. The new lock clicked softly behind it, a sound that felt like peace. The days that followed were quieter than I'd expected. The house seemed to settle into the silence, as if it had been waiting for me to stop filling it with apologies. I woke early, opened the curtains, and let the morning light spill across the kitchen floor. The sound of the coffee maker was the only noise for miles. Lila didn't call. Not that week, or the one after. I imagined she was angry, or embarrassed, or both. I didn't blame her. Some distances take time to understand. I spent my mornings tending to the plants on the porch, the ones she'd once said were too much clutter. The geraniums had started to bloom again, stubborn and red, reaching toward the sun like they'd been waiting for room to breathe. So had I. One afternoon, the mailman left an envelope tucked between a catalog and the gas bill. The handwriting stopped me before I even opened it. Lila's. I read it standing at the counter, the air still warm from baking bread. "Mom." I didn't mean to sound cruel. I just needed to feel in control again. Everything feels like it's slipping lately, and I thought maybe if I could fix the house, I could fix something. I'm sorry if I went too far. The letter was half apology, half explanation, like a bridge built only halfway across a river. I folded it carefully and set it beside the fruit bowl. I didn't write back. Not yet. That evening, I finished painting the last room upstairs, a soft sage green, the color of calm mornings and open windows. When the final brushstroke dried, I stepped back and let the quiet fill the space. It wasn't emptiness I felt then. It was peace, the kind that doesn't announce itself, just breathes beside you, steady and unafraid. It was a week before I saw her car pull into the driveway again. I'd been on the porch, trimming the dead leaves from the fern when the engine stopped. Lila stepped out slowly. No suitcase this time. Just a small paper bag from the bakery downtown, the one we used to visit on Saturdays. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. I nodded, setting the shears down. "Hi, Lila." We stood there for a moment, two careful figures framed by the quiet. Then I opened the door. Inside, the air smelled of fresh paint and coffee. She looked around as if seeing it for the first time. "You really did all this," she murmured. "I did," I said. "It feels lighter now." She smiled faintly but didn't sit until I gestured to the chair across from mine. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed. "I wasn't trying to push you out. I didn't know what to do with how everything was changing. Work. My life. You still so sure of yourself. I think I was jealous. Of me," I asked quietly. "Of how you never seem scared. I keep pretending I'm in control. But I'm not. I guess I wanted this house to feel like mine because I didn't know how to feel like me anymore." I watched her hands twist the paper bag into folds, and I kept saying yes, I said, even when I should have said no. That didn't help either of us. Lila nodded. Maybe we both forgot the difference between helping and holding on. The words hung between us. Not sharp, just honest. We didn't hug, we didn't cry. But when she asked, "Sunday dinner," I said. Every week. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something real, like opening a window after a long storm and realizing the house is still standing. Months later, the evenings grew longer, the air carrying that soft Charleston salt the wind always brings before summer. I set 2 chairs on the porch, one for me, one left empty. Not for absence, but for choice. The jasmine had begun to bloom again. Climbing the rails I'd painted myself, the house looked different now. Not because of the walls or locks, but because it finally matched the rhythm of my days. Lila rented a small apartment downtown. She visited sometimes less often than before, but when she did, her voice was warmer, her eyes softer. She brought flowers once, awkwardly arranged, and laughed when I placed them in the same vase she used to call old-fashioned. When the porch light flickered on, it glowed over the new brass locks, polished and steady. I leaned back, teacup warm in my hand, the hum of crickets filling the silence that used to ache. I looked out across the yard, the light spilling just far enough to touch the edge of the garden, and whispered to the night, not revenge, just room to breathe. The house seemed to listen and exhale with me.